All right. This particular essay is the first in the collection that I'm putting together. And the word that precedes it and that introduces, along with its origins, the theme is introduction. Okay. Introduction, from the Latin introducere, meaning to lead in, to bring in, to establish, to bring forward as an assertion. From the prefix intro, meaning inward or inside, plus ducere, meaning to lead. What is true for books is true for people. The deeper you go, the better you will understand them. And even though you won't always be able to rightly articulate what exactly it is you do understand about the person or yourself or the situation or the words spoken, but especially those left unspoken, you will feel deep down that what you have come to comprehend is of great importance, and that it not only can change lives, but will change lives, yours and mine among them. So let me lead you inward by way of introduction, and these 10 things I'd like you to know about me. 1. I was born in the year of our Lord 1979. Of course, according to a few I know, there is no way in the fires below that the Lord would ever lay claim on several of those years during the 70s. Either way, like a sprig of cilantro atop an already well-seasoned chili, I closed the decade out. 2. By the 3rd grade, I had already fallen in love 3 times. My relationship with Kimberly from Mrs. Rammel's early morning preschool lasted all of one day. It was very hot and cold. I fell in love with her on Halloween when I first saw her dressed as a ballerina in that red sequin tutu. Then just as quickly fell out of love when I discovered she was not into pirates with cardboard tinfoil swords that year, but instead a curly-haired Superman. Morgan, I curse you to this day. Then there was Joan Moser, my 3rd grade teacher, who was, tragically, and to say nothing of our age difference, a Mrs., and already spoken for at the time. Tiffany Williams, on the other hand, who had puffy bangs and wore pastel-colored sweaters and smelled like mixed berry cobbler, and who gave me her school picture, which I kept in my desk and would peek at from time to time, actually loved me back. Which means we passed notes and giggled uncomfortably instead of talking, and even once or twice held hands at recess. And all of this through the 3rd grade and into the 4th, which is a really, really long time for elementary school love to last. But there's no denying that what we had was as real as could be at that age. Until, that is, she broke my heart and moved across town to a different school where I like to think she never loved again, and even perhaps turned to a life of crime, because how could it be otherwise without my love as the steadying influence throughout her young, fragile adolescence? I can still remember that exact moment, though, how my heart kept breaking down my cheeks just outside the blue classroom door of Mrs. Barfus, who was my music teacher and, as I recall, a pleasantly plump lady, and whose name I laughed at all the time, but not when hurting. No, not then. And how when she opened the door and looked at me and asked me in a very quiet voice to come in and talk to her for a moment, I fell into her arms. And how she held me against her giant bosom while I sobbed, each muffled squeak, each trembling breath and wild gasp a note on a page of a stirring symphony that upon its final decrescendo left us both changed for good. 3. Preceding even my love for Kimberly and Mrs. Moser and Tiffany was my love for words, which, unlike the latter assumed miscreant spinster of Seattle, never left me. Even when I turned my back on them for a time, or abused them, or once in a very dark time used them harshly to describe myself. The first book I ever wrote was penciled during recess across one giant sheet of gray butcher paper. By all 1st grade accounts and those that heard it read at the local young authors celebration, it was a masterpiece worthy of print. And so, if there is space somewhere in this book, I will perhaps share with you The Rainbow That Goes to Japan. That way I can tell everyone I meet that the first book I ever wrote was published, and they will think I am some kind of child prodigy when it comes to writing and that I've always had the gift. And I will let them think this because What harm could it do? In college, my love for words introduced me to poetry, and up until now, I've spent the bulk of my time writing poems, out of which a couple were published. Each time I was paid not with money, but with free or discounted copies of the journal in which they first appeared, which reality leads me to share this trite, albeit accurate, piece about the life of a poet. After my reading at the coffee shop. Your poetry, says my oldest, just doesn't make sense, Dad. To which I reply, sense or sense? Only to realize as I try convincing the coffee house goers to buy my poems instead of another pastry, on both accounts, he is correct. 4. On the subject of words still, I have really only been without words a handful of times. 4 of those times sit with me around the dinner table most nights and call me Dad or Daddy, or when they are trying to bring added attention to their filial obedience because they want something, Father. Before that was when I looked across the altar into my young bride's hazel eyes and saw worlds without end. And then, shortly after, when I looked at her across the honeymoon suite, which is, in the end, how we came to have 4 boys sitting around the dinner table, calling me Father, and would you please be so kind as to pass the delicious, perfectly salted vegetables our lovely mother has so generously prepared? By the way, Dad, look at this sweet motorbike. Can I have it? I remember the moment each one was born, how they came out of the womb like a sentence forming, from behind that veiled curtain, their unblemished bodies made up of lines and letters and periods, and how their tiny mouths immediately began searching for vowels, A and E, of course, then I, O, U, and how their fingers unfolded slowly, slower, reaching for the consonants. And then in the air, their quivering cries, every single time this beautiful sentence forming, fiat experimentum in corpore puris. 5. I am a religious guy, meaning in a very general sense, I believe in a power bigger than me. I also believe everyone is religious in one way or another, even you agnostics and atheists. Maybe your religion is poetry or painting or public relations or paleontology. Maybe you find purpose and power in computers or robotics or mathematics or science or teaching or reading or even stringing together random thoughts in the way of run-on sentences with lots of ands and ors to connect them. And even though your English teachers told you never to do that, you do it anyway because it feels right, and people can't slap a grade on feelings, can they? Feelings are so much bigger than us sometimes. Lots of times. Besides, life is made up of ands and ors. It is like one long and winding run-on sentence, really, and rarely will it stop for a comma, let alone a period or an exclamation mark, until the great day your gravestone marks the earth like one. May your gravestone never be a question mark, though. 6. Speaking of religion, I have since birth belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is a really long way to say the more commonly recognized Mormon. This admission, which word makes faith sound like a crime, it is not, will, by some strange reality, lead some of you to suddenly hate me and maybe even think to yourself, I have to put the book down. I can't read a book by a Mormon. I am going to close this book right now, in just 1 second, right after this sentence ends. Which is yet another reason for me to embrace the run-on sentence. And some of you, just as strangely, will love me more because of my faith pronouncement. But let me say this in as didactic a way as possible. Both are forms of judgment. And both decisions to love or hate solely because of an association or disassociation will largely waste your time, and my time, and my editor's time, and my publisher's time, and we don't have a lot of time. Not on this earth anyway. So let's use it to learn from each other instead, to learn to love each other, to learn to be loved by each other. In elementary school, I used to trade my mom-made peanut butter sandwich on smashed white bread for sushi with a kid named Yoshi, who was a Buddhist from birth and who had a fondness for 80s love songs. Over the Wall Street atmosphere that surrounded our fold-out lunch table, Yoshi and I saw value in what the other had to offer. That is all. It is that simple. California rolls, Peter Pan peanut butter, homemade strawberry jam, and how can we be lovers if we can't be friends? How can we start over when the fighting never ends? Nothing else really mattered. We are so many things from birth, but judgmental is not one of them. So let us be accepting of each other. 7. The stories that follow are my PB&J sandwiches on smashed Wonder Bread, if you will. They may not be pretty, but they are what I've got to give. And my mom, who is one of the best things to go through the 60s and 70s, and who the Lord will certainly lay claim on, or we're all in trouble, helped me make them too, in a manner of speaking. Now, I don't know what is in your lunchbox, or brown paper bag, or wrapped in that gnarly-looking wad of tinfoil, but let's make this trade, and let's make it fair. 8. More intimately speaking, the act of opening this book, of taking in its new book smell and letting eyes fall on each letter and mouths whisper each sound, is a consummation, if you will, between two strangers who might otherwise never had met if not for these little words and even littler letters printed on papers, letters like you and I. Words like life and love and life and love, and does anything else really matter? Beyond the words, though, don't make the mistake of overlooking the ones that are not there, the blank spaces between them that are yours on which to draw your own conclusions. Or, if you'd prefer, on which to paint or sing or dance your own conclusions. To each their own. There is at times an awful lot of talking in this world, but some of the most powerful and most beautiful things I know were made between words, like my kids, one of which is still hovering nearby, hinting at his need for a motorbike. 9. Did I mention that Tiffany Williams broke my heart in the 4th grade? Well, she did, and it hurt. But so many more people have nurtured it and healed it and helped it grow. This is because of them. This is for them. 10. To end this introduction and begin all that follows, let me share with you something my dad taught me once, using as his teaching point the biblical story of Balaam. Are you familiar with it? The one where a headstrong man proves so stubborn that he won't listen to reason, let alone the Lord. So the latter chooses to open the mouth of a donkey in order to guide Balaam off the wrong path. Well, about this story, my dad said, if the Lord can make one ass speak, he can make another. Ergo, I begin.